Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the BEP conference. So if you're here to hear a little bit more about the DFE process for training your senior mental health lead, and also to listen to our colleagues talk about breathe education and wellbeing censuses, if that's the right plural, I don't think it is, then you're in the right place. My name's Anna Robinson. I'm the mental and emotional health lead here at Birmingham Education Partnership, and apologies, my voice seems to be going this morning, so hopefully it will last. Colin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Colin Palmer, Senior Research Coordinator at Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I'm also Honorary Research Fellow at Warwick University. That's
brilliant. Thanks, Colin. So Colin, you're in charge of slides, aren't you? So I'll do my best, Jonathan Van Tam. So do you want to click us on to the next slide and keep going? That's great. So what we wanted to just do this morning was bring you up to speed with what the DFE is saying around the process for training your senior mental health lead currently. We do have a training that we're running here, but also what we wanted to just make sure was everybody was aware of the grant process and things that are available to you. So we'll talk you through that quite quickly. And then Colin and colleagues at Warwick University, along with ourselves, the local authority, have been developing a website called Breathe, along with a way of being able to do a wellbeing census for your school setting. And we trialled that last year, and we're hoping to kind of launch that in a much bigger way this year. So it was also an opportunity for you to be able to hear about some of that. So next slide, please, Colin. Oh. Lovely, that's brilliant. Thanks, Colin. So most of you will probably be aware that there's been quite a long history around about how the DFE have intended to upskill the mental health leadership within schools. So myself and a couple of my colleagues, Anna and Mandy, have been involved in that process for most of the time since the Green Paper was being discussed. So we've got quite a long history here of being aware of what's happening. But now the DFE have actually released their guidance around what a whole school and college approach looks like, and how they're intending to grant fund for mainstream schools that process. And so this is around creating and supporting the leadership of mental health in your school. And the important thing, just to remind people, I guess, is that this is a non-statutory role, so it's not the same as a DSL for mental health. But it is very much a leadership role. It's about strategy. It's about maintaining the focus of mental health on your school improvement pathway, and making sure that you've got people equipped to be able to do that. So building their confidence in that process. So in order to be able to book on some of the DFE quality assured training, so the DFE went out to providers in the market and invited people to put forward their proposals for training. And as an organisation here, we have done that, so I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But there are a number of organisations across the country who have put forward proposals to be quality assured by colleagues at Leeds Beckett University. Next slide, please, Colin. So as I say, and I've lifted these slides directly from the DFE's presentation. And the reason I've done that is just to make sure that everything I put on here is exactly what they are wanting to communicate, rather than any of my interpretation over the top of it. So as I say, this is really about a strategic leadership role. It's about overseeing what's happening in your school. It's not about that person then doing interventions in and of themselves. It's the coordination of that, and it's about maintaining the priority of mental health leadership in the school. And one of the key parts to it is ensuring that that you have the support of your head, your leadership team, and that it's really about the whole school being ready to take this work on and to do it. So that's one of the things when the DFE have set out their grant process. One of the things that you will be asked is our leadership team behind this? Have we got the right permission to be able to empower people to go ahead and do this? And I think from our own experience of working across schools for a good while now in Birmingham, actually that's really important. So as long as your leadership are backing you and empowering people to take these steps and and create this approach that's right for your school, then that means that success is much greater. Thank you, Colin. So as we know, a mental health lead is not about being a mental health professional. It's not about diagnosis and treatment, although what it is about is being able to understand processes whereby we might need to refer somebody on to other levels of care, and also be able to understand how we might articulate those things in order to be able to get young people's needs much better met. But this is also about how your school is engaging with what else is on offer around you. So that's also about your relationships, not only with statutory providers, but with local providers in your area, about what you're able to do within school, your actual in-school graduated response, and then how you relate to services and things that are going on around. You will probably all have seen the public health 8 principle model. So that paper has just been re-released. Actually, there's an updated version where the diagram has changed colours niftily. But everything is built around those 8 principles. And that's basically looking at everything through a lens of leadership. So the other thing I suppose to say at this point is that as a city, as Birmingham, we're intending to then use that 8-point model so that we have a common language across all the work that we're doing. So there may be a number of things that you are already involved in as a school. And when you overlay the public health 8 principles over that, everything you're doing should then fit quite well into each of those principles. So the idea then is that we can keep a really consistent language. Everything you know is at that level. What we also know is that actually the majority of school settings actually already have somebody who has been identified as a mental health lead. So you can see here, actually, that's kind of gone up really significantly. And we know, excuse me, we know that one of the things that those mental health leads ask, particularly us around, is about increasing their confidence. So some of the training that's on offer through this kind of DFE authorised route, part of that should be about how we really understand and get to grips with what the role of a mental health lead is, because that's one of the things I think that's needed some clarity going forward. And it may well look quite different in your school. So it really varies depending on your school context, rightly so. It varies according to your own skills and knowledge as a mental health lead. It varies according to the size of your school and those who you're able to work with. So some of our experience has been actually that this role works particularly well where you have somebody in as the kind of senior mental health lead, and then somebody more operational as well to perhaps work alongside them. That seems to have worked really well in the past in schools that we've worked in. Next slide, please, Colin. And so in terms of what you need to know as a senior lead, I'm going to eventually, I'll post into the chat a link to the DFE's page all around the senior mental health lead, and on there you will be able to find the learning outcomes, excuse me, which, as I say, align to those 8 principles within the public health model. And the training then is around building your knowledge, building your skills, and building your ability to connect with others as well in the same role in order to implement a whole school approach. And there is a process, I think it might be on the next slide, Colin, if you can flick forward for me, I think it's on the next one. There is a process that schools can go through to identify which training is the training that they need. So if I tell you a little bit about the DFE grant that's available, then that will kind of help you understand this a little bit more. So the DFE have said to schools that, to all mainstream schools and colleges, they're going to offer a fixed value one-off grant of £1,200. Now, at the moment, we know that there's a process in place where that grant will be released later on in the autumn term. So just hold on to that thought for a moment. And the idea with that grant is then that you can use it to pay for any of the DFE quality assured senior mental health lead training courses. And again, I'll put the link in to the chat that you can take to find your way to that. So as I said at the beginning, a number of organisations put forward training courses to be quality assured. And what that means is that people have pitched their training at various different levels, depending on your skill and depending on the areas of development that you need. that can then be funded by that DFE grant. And the idea is that it could be spent on partly the grant or in full, partly the training or in full on the training, but also where you may not spend the full grant allocation, you can use some of that to potentially cover backfill, or it might be that there are particular resources that you want to bring in to be able to support some of that development across your school. There is a set of grant conditions. So as I say, it's mainstream schools. So that's all state-funded mainstream schools, academies, alternative provisions, pupil referral units, special academies and mainstream special schools, and FE colleges. It doesn't extend, I'm afraid, to early years and nursery provision. However, if you are a setting that obviously has that provision on site, it would be kind of, I suppose, reasonable to expect that actually you're kind of bringing that into the fold in developing your whole school approach. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So as I say, the grant application process, so there's a specific process that schools will be able to apply through, isn't going to be available until later in the autumn term. And at the moment, we don't know when that's going to be. So we had thought it might be now, but it seems to have been delayed slightly. However, what the DFE are saying is that schools do not have to wait to book a course. So the link that I'll put in here will take you through to all the kind of the information that you need to be able to know whether you are eligible for a grant, and also to look at the checklist or the kind of questionnaire that can help you to book a quality assured course. What the DFE are saying is that actually if you choose to go ahead and book a course now, then when the details of the grant application are released, assuming you've been, met the eligibility criteria, and you then apply for a grant within 2 weeks of that process going live, then they are saying they will guarantee a grant to any school who does that. So if you say today, you go book a training, keep hold of all your information and the course booking code as evidence of having done that, then once that grant application process goes live, you have 2 weeks to be able to apply, and they're saying they will honour anybody who's applied for one and already booked, provided you meet all the terms and conditions. Next slide, please, Colin. So as I say, we're running some training ourselves here at BEP, and that's really grounded in our kind of long experience now of working with schools, looking at whole school approaches, particularly through a resilience building lens. So that course is available to be booked through that link on the BEP events page. I would say we've particularly aimed that at a kind of more foundational level, but coming away from it, you will have a real understanding of what the role is of the senior mental health lead. And also we've opted to deliver that face-to-face as well, in order that we can kind of build some real connectivity between people who are on the training. And that process on that training will take you through a real understanding of the role of leadership, understanding where the role fits in your school, understanding about graduated response, and kind of identifying issues and what we can do about that. And also support you in writing an action plan that goes alongside, because that's one of the key things, is about having an action plan that you're able to then take forward in your school that fits within those 8 public health principles. So I think these slides will be available, I imagine, Claire, won't they? So all the links are already in these slides anyway, but I will post one in here now. If you go onto this page on the BEP website, again, all of the links that I've mentioned today are available on there. But if you did want to stay local and look at kind of kicking off your training of a senior mental health lead, then we are running some. As I say, it is at a kind of currently, that's at quite a foundational level. But we just wanted to use that opportunity to say to people, because I know a lot of people wanted to kind of stay within Birmingham for training. So Colin, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through kind of thinking about Breathe and the Wellbeing census. And then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. But I will say, if we don't have time for questions, then what I think we'll do is kind of keep hold of any questions that come, and we'll then do a written response that we can put up with all the conference information. So Colin, I'm going to hand over to you if that's all right.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. I'll try and move through the slides quite quickly so that we will have time for questions. So thanks for the opportunity. I'm just going to talk you through what we've been doing at Breathe over the last year. Some of you are probably involved in the pilot census that we ran earlier this year, and we'll also talk about some of the results from that as well. But just to tell you where we're coming from with this, I've got a background, worked in youth mental health for about the last 10 years now. And we've always had this problem that there's increased need for mental health conditions in young people, but we don't really have the services and resources to treat everyone. So we have what's called the retreatment gap. But recently we've been seeing quite substantial increases in the number of diagnosable mental health conditions in schools. And you can see here, these are the stats. That we're looking at about a 5% increase in both primary and secondary schools over the last 3 years. Also, Birmingham being the major city in the West Midlands as well, it's probably important to point out that in the West Midlands, we are the area that has the highest percentage of children with a probable mental health disorder by region. So we were looking at this problem and thinking, well, it takes a long time to get the training and resources, to get the kind of clinical staff that would need to be there to deal with these conditions. So what can we do? How can we be smart and try and innovate new approaches to try and solve this problem? And one of the things that we can do is we can start looking at something called digital mental health infrastructure. And the idea behind this is actually we can link ourselves up better with services, third-party providers, provide digital mental health resources, and actually take an active role in measuring and keeping an eye on what's going on in our region, then we stand at we're in a much better position to deal with that strategically. So the way that we've directed our censuses around wellbeing, and there's a very good reason for doing wellbeing. Wellbeing it's really nice, it's accessible, it's low risk, it can be done quickly, and it will give us this idea about what is going on with schools and what might be some of the precursors to what will then go on to develop into more severe mental health conditions. So the measures that we used in the census is the Sterling Children's Wellbeing Scale and the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale for secondary school pupils. They're both really well-known measures. You've probably seen them around, but the important thing is they're both validated. There is population studies that back these measures up, so they can be used to compare and contrast the findings that you have when someone's being scored on them. We also added in 4 items what's called connectedness, because we thought that this is quite an interesting area, and that really looks to try and identify how much a young person feels connected to their school and how safe they feel at that school. We collect some demographics as well so that we can actually stratify this and see if there's any groups that emerge that are particularly at risk for poor mental health and wellbeing. And we're also looking in the future, which will be the next census, to look at teachers' wellbeing and also their attitudes to trauma-informed care, which give us an idea about the workforce and how they actually, what their approach is and feelings about working with young people that might have experienced high levels of trauma. To just give you an example of the measures, these are all of the questions that are on either of the 2 measures for wellbeing. So you can see it's only 15 or 14 questions on the other. It's really quick and easy to do, and part of our approach has been to make collecting this data and managing it as easy and as simple as possible. So we absolutely recognise that schools have a lot on their plate, and giving them another task around mental health is really important. And I've not met many teachers that haven't said that it's really important, but it is a resource stress on the system, so we want to make things as quick and easy for teachers to do as possible. And this is the Arctic measure, which the local education authority have actually purchased licenses, commercial product. It's really good. It's a psychometrically validated measure of this attitude to trauma-informed care. It's a bit longer, it's about 45 items, but you're only going to do this with teachers in your school if you choose to take part in it. And it will give that teacher an individual kind of profile of where their strengths and weaknesses lie in terms of their trauma-informed care. So putting this all together, just give you an idea about the data and what we can do with the data. So we'll have this individual level data, and individual level data is quite useful for individuals, but actually we want to look at groups, and we want to shape policy and help schools get better at managing wellbeing in their schools. So really it's that school level data that we deliver to schools that will allow us to have a look at what's going on in primary schools, what's going on in secondary schools, what's going on with the transition when people move, when a young person moves from primary school to secondary school, and then we're adding this aspect about teachers' attitudes and interactions as well into mix. So that's give us a really good profile at a school level of what's going on in terms of wellbeing. Then we can extrapolate this up into a regional view of what's going on. So now we've got locations we can potentially look to target resources at. We can identify schools and maybe similarities between schools that have high levels of young people with that are scoring poorly on their wellbeing measures. And the system that we've got, it allows us to actually keep this data separately, so we can effectively, schools can operate anonymously and still get access to their data while still contributing data into a regional picture of what's going on. Like I say, there's been a lot of thought of going about how do we actually do this. There's some really dark days in my past when I've gone into schools and I've been there with 60 sheets of paper and going out and asking questions. We don't do stuff like that anymore when we're trying to do this stuff. Now everything's delivered digitally. Young people could do it on their phone if they wanted to. It's all touchscreen, completely interoperable against all the devices and browsers. You do need an internet connection and a computer, basically. So that's the way that it operates. And like I say, schools get back, they'll get back a report, which I'll show you an example of in a moment, that details their wellbeing and school connectors across their school. And then also they'll have access to the overall report and a website, which I'm going to explain in a moment as well, that will detail to them what's actually going on in the region. And then they'll be able to compare where they fit against that average, say, for Birmingham. And just to say, part of this process, we've got to consider GDPR. One of the things that we've been doing is working with DPOs in the schools that have come on board and worked with us on the pilot. We've also worked with the lead DPO at Birmingham City Council and a legal counsel at Warwick University to make sure that we're doing everything right, ensuring that people's data is safe, and actually everything's been done from an information governance procedure. So the pilot. So in the pilot, we had 17 schools. So we got about 3,500 pupils, which is not bad at all. We're looking to plan to roll out a full census in March, where we'd really like to increase the number of schools that took part, so we can get a good coverage and good sample of what's going on in Birmingham. So just some very simple sort of findings from the pilot. So you can see here from the tables that actually there's a bit of variability within schools, but generally all schools were performing quite well in terms of wellbeing. So that it's in the average range, with some schools, a couple of schools really, actually going into the good range for wellbeing. But really the most important thing here is we've actually started building a metric in Birmingham now. So we've got population scores for these measures, but they're in other cities, different places, and different places have different services, different demographic makeup. They have different levels of poverty. We really want to get a metric for Birmingham, and then we can use that metric to inform going forward how we look at wellbeing and what we compare wellbeing to. And the other thing that we can do once we've got that metric as well is we can start doing some statistical analysis that will say, well, this is the average score for wellbeing in Birmingham, and then we can identify the pupils that actually are scoring below that. And so we can see roughly here we had just over 800 pupils that were below the average score in Birmingham. So we can start to direct resources at regional, local government level towards areas where there's high levels of pupils that are scoring below average. So this is an example of the report that schools get back. So you can see this is actually the overall report for Birmingham. And you can see here that for an individual school, what you'll be able to see is in this top right hand corner on the what would be the second page, you can see that what I showed you, that little bell curve, is actually, that's represented there. And we've tried to represent the figures in a way that are actually digestible for teachers, but there's also an accompanying website that will talk you through how to interpret this information. And we're also looking to do some workshops as well to help schools get to grips with what their findings were. So what do we do next? Now, there is one thing that I think that research has possibly done quite a lot of over the many years it's been operating in schools, and that's highlighting problems, but not really coming up with a solution of what to do once we do highlight problems. So what we've pitched this alongside is the publishing of a website. And this website is really all about trying to help teachers get access to resources to improve the well-being in their school. So it completely maps to some of the stuff that Anna was saying about mental health training and how to actually upskill your staff so that they can actually perform these kind of expected roles from Department of Education. So again, we worked for the last year with teachers and young people to try and get an idea about what's going to be useful to have on this website. And we're looking to work with teachers in the coming year as well. So we've just got some funding to make a whole new set of resources. And at the end of the presentation, I've actually asked Claire to drop it in the chat. There's a link if you want to have your say in what you think should be a priority for us to focus on. Then you can get involved on our feedback page and tell us where to direct our focus to. So one of the ideas behind what we're trying to do here, we really wanted the idea about, this is just a website that a teacher can go onto. They can click on a topic area that they're going to teach today. It will give them a video that will train them in what the area is. It will give them a video that they can use with the classroom, and then it will give them downloadable classroom activities. So we'd say this all fits into an interactive lesson plan. And the idea is just to make it as simple and as easy for teachers to participate in promoting good mental health and well-being. Oh, and that's everything. I'll just say that we are looking to start going into this recruitment phase. We're not quite there at the moment, but so it'll probably start around January, maybe towards the end of the year. The next census is actually planned to happen in March 2022. But if you've got any questions, then please just send me an email. I'd be very happy to hear from you, and I'll try and answer as best I can. Or if you want to have a look at the website and see what happened last year in a little bit more detail, then if you just go to the Breathe Edu website, on the census page, and you'll be able to find information there. I think both of these links are in the chat anyway. That's everything for me. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Colin. Colin, one of the things I just wanted to ask you was, I wonder whether you could go back to the slide with the report on for people and just kind of talk through that a little bit more, because I think sure. it's helpful for people to understand what this means for them in a school context.
Yeah, okay. So I realised when I was talking before that actually the cursor wasn't where I thought it was going to be. So yeah. So if we just go for this, so on this is the whole school report. So it's your school report would be slightly different. In that there'll be some information here that will tell you about just some basic DFE stats regarding your school, and it's just to pitch the data in that. So we're looking at things like the percentage of SEND support that's in your school, people that that are on free school meals, things like that, and absence scores. Then you've got this section here, which is actually about your sample. These they're validated measures, but you actually still need, if you want to do comparisons between groups, you're still going to need a certain amount of young people in each group to make those comparisons. So overall, it's pretty good because we can make good comparisons because we've got a big sample size in a school. If you've only got 4 people out of what is 300 people that are say female, then you're not really going to be able to make too much of a claim onto what's going on in that group. So this is just to outline to you what the shape of your data is from a sample perspective. And there's some information here that will tell you how to appropriately use that. So on this second page, you can see here that actually this is where all your figures are for what we found out in terms of the wellbeing census. You've got the score for your school, which would be here, and then we've got 2 population scores that are actually linked in here. So these are what's been found in the population at large. Interestingly, our sample size, even in the pilot, was approaching what these population scores are drawn from. You get good statistical significance once you are dealing with these numbers. So it's really useful to having the number that we've got already. But actually, once we get, if we get 50% of our schools in Birmingham, that's going to be an even more definite metric that we can pull together. But you can see, like, sort of comparing these, they've not really moved too much over quite a long time span. And actually, we were thinking that this 2020 one was actually taken in the midst of COVID-19 as well. So it just goes to show that if we're doing a census every year, then we can accommodate for those big things that might happen in our environments that might actually have an impact on well-being. And then next to that, we've actually got here, which is actually a version of that, the bell chart that I was showing you. It's the, if we categorize well-being into, well, okay, what was the average score? Who is above that? So we take technical taught, but 1 standard deviation from the mean, that identifies our people that are high scoring at well-being. And then if we go one standard deviation from the mean the other direction, then we can identify the low people. And this just gives us a way of then targeting resources towards the lower group that might be existing there. And then below this, you've actually just got all that information just broken down by year groups. So, I mean, if you had a whiz with statistics, you'd be able to do some statistical analyses between groups here. I think that you'll be able to pull that out when you look at them, if you can see like one group is particularly struggling. So we've got here, it's quite interesting that year 11 wellbeing was quite markedly lower than the other groups, and so was year 7. So you can extrapolate a lot of information just from looking at these bars from this. And then finally, you've got school connectedness down here, which basically does the same thing. You've got the total scores here, and then you've got it broken down by demographics on the, well, cascading across to the right. Does that explain everything? Sorry, it's quite comprehensive there.
Thank you, Colin. No, that's great. Thank you. And I guess one of the things about school connectedness, and the reason it's so important, is because we know that when children have a stronger sense of identity or belonging to a school, that's a really protective factor, isn't it, as well, which is why we put that one in.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting that one of the findings we had is that school connectedness very high in primary school children, and it plummets as soon as you get into year 7 in secondary school. And it might be a good thing to start thinking about, well, how do we find a solution to that? What do we need to do in order to try and see what's going on with that transition?
That's great. Thank you, Colin. And I know you were slightly anxious about how long it would take you to do your slides, but the good news is we've got some time for questions.
Yes.
So if people do have questions, then feel free to pop them in the chat if you'd like to, and we'll see if we can answer them. And if we can't, then we'll go and find the answers if we can for you. So just while we wait, Colin, you're happy for people to get in touch with you now? I'm guessing we'll do a kind of a repeat.
Yeah, absolutely.
A bit nearer the time.
Yeah, if people want to contact me, then that's fine. I can talk through on an individual level what it's all about. I think one of the things if we've got time, what I would stress is, because I took out a couple of slides, is about, it's really about collectivizing and collaborating on how to put wellbeing strategies together in the city. It won't work on an individual school level, and it really won't work also from a top-down level, in my view, from a local education authority. It's about that combination, and that's what a lot of this approach that we're trying to do is about. It's about bringing people together. The website is actually really a digital platform that we hope to extend, that will allow people to have a say in what they think should be going on. There's moves towards eventually getting a mental health forum going that school mental health leads will be able to access and then share best practice. And really we want to try and get a kind of organic relationship between schools and what's on that website, so that it's actually reflective of what teachers need and how it should be presented for teachers to use. So that's really like the strategy behind it. The data, of course, is really useful because it will tell us really accurately what's going on in our city. And once you start building a metric like, say, wellbeing every year, lots of things can be built from that. I know that depending on how savvy you are with the world of mental health and early intervention, there's often a move towards, well, can we do screening? And screening is absolutely possible, but it's something that I think we need to work towards. There's lots of pitfalls and barriers that we'd need to get over in the creation of that. It's got to make sure that it does what it says it's doing. It's not mislabeling people. But the way that you get to that is by first building these kind of lower level foundations, so that you've got the buy-in and people understand what they're doing, and you build trust in pupils and parents that the data is going to be secure and safe, and it's all being used in the best interests for them.
That's great, thank you, Colin. We've just had a question about whether Breathe would be suitable for primary school children.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I probably didn't make that clear. So we've got primary school and secondary school children. We have got some gaps that we're working towards. That is, we're not doing year 3. We just don't feel that children of that age will be able to independently fill out the questionnaire as well as they should do. And we really want to do some work with early years as well. And we also want to do some work with special schools. This is a work in progress that we're working towards. We just need to try and get the right measures and a way of presenting them so that they're accessible. But we will get there in the end. It's just there's a lot of work just to try and get us to this stage at the moment. But yeah, primary schools, absolutely. Secondary schools, and yeah, and colleges, yeah, absolutely fine.
And in terms of just the resources as well, then on Breathe, they would then be eligible for.
Yeah, I'd really recommend people to have a look on Breathe. It's all laid out in sections. So you've got early years, primary school, secondary school. A lot of the design behind Breathe. So I would. My past has really been at the later end in adolescence with psychosis, some more severe mental health conditions. But we know that actually a lot of mental health conditions start before you're 14 years old, and they develop and emerge into more serious conditions. So our approach in the past has always been to go with the quite scary clinical lots of conditions, which can sometimes lead people to thinking, well, actually everything is a referral into mental health services. Actually, there's a lot of work that teachers and parents and everyone can do at an earlier stage, which isn't in the clinical scheme of things, but it's more of a strength-based model. So we've tried to pitch the advice and the information and resources that you would get at each stage, early years, primary school, secondary school, to map to that kind of development of mental health. But there's also always, there's a button on that website as well that if you feel that someone you're really worried about, then there's all links to all your crisis lines and people that can get you immediate help